So I first came across you on Instagram, a video where you were talking about, I think the opening line actually was, "My wife doesn't want to have sex with me." And and it's funny. It really is. Like, that is a funny sentence. And also for me personally, that was my experience. And I carried so much shame around thinking that there was something wrong with me for feeling that way and really not understanding why why that was coming up, like why was in my relationship with my husband at the time, and like really felt disconnected from our own deep levels of connection and intimacy. And it really took, honestly, like my divorce, our separation and my divorce, and having like a deep dive into the parts of myself that I had avoided for a really long time, until I was able to get to a place of understanding like why that actually came up for me. And for a woman, that need for connection, the need for like to be seen, wanted, desired from your partner in order for your body to open up and want to connect in the bedroom. And I had no idea that like that thought never ever would have crossed my mind when I was going through it. I really internalized like this is my fault and carried a lot of, as I said, like shame around that. And I really didn't even know how to communicate that with my husband at the time. And so when I saw that video of you talking about that, I had done so much work, prior. So I had the understanding within myself. But I think for so many women and men as well in relationships, especially long-term relationships, like this isn't talked about. And so I would love to kind of just really like dive right in with you. Like, how did you even get to that understanding within yourself of like that is such an important piece of a relationship, and that is like such, it's not even a need for a woman, like it is a requirement for the woman to feel safe and open in her relationship. Talk to me a little bit about like how you really understood that was so important.
Um, yeah, we're jumping right into the deep end. Sex and a relationship and intimacy and connection. I'm not an expert of any kind for one. I'm just a guy that is trying to figure life out and figure out how things work. And I'm much more intuitively based than I am analytical or processing. So to say exactly how I started to realize some of these things is hard to kind of unpackage that and say, this is when I knew this is what women needed or this is what men needed. It was more just time and observation and recognizing that there are obviously pretty big differences between men and women. And one of them, for example, I think relationships are uniquely designed to force you in a way, if you want to have a good relationship, to not be selfish.
Mm.
They're just set up that way by the nature of women and by the nature of men. For example, and feel free to push back on this from the female perspective, because I'm talking strictly from a guy's perspective that just is trying to observe some of these things. Uh, for a woman to feel in the mood, to feel like she wants to have sex with her partner, um, she has to, like you mentioned, she has to feel first emotionally connected to the man that she's engaging in the activity with. And men are the opposite. We have to have physical intimacy first to be able to evoke a lot of the emotional intimacy. And
Mm.
so there's this like game of in a lot of these relationships where it seems like the husband and wife are playing chicken with each other. Like the woman, and not even consciously, the woman's waiting for the man to perform create this emotional safety, this emotional connection with her. The guy is waiting for physical connection. And a lot of times they just can't meet, they can't find each other. And so they get lost. And I just, I realized that the more that I was able to really try to understand my wife and understand what made her blossom, what made her feel vibrant and beautiful and feel like she was safe with me, the more that she became, more sexual, more physically affectionate with me. And, it's just something that I've observed. So I don't know exactly how I figured that out to answer your question, but yeah.
Yeah, I I'm so curious, like, because for you to even say that you like had that sense of curiosity to like really understand your wife, like has that always been innately within you? Are you like a super curious person? Are you paying attention to the little cues? Because I feel like that is a really important piece, and so many women like are craving that. They want their partner to take an interest in like the little things. And I also feel like that's a big miss in a lot of relationships. Like, were you growing up as a child, like did you just have that deep sense of curiosity? Are you, or is that something that you picked up sort of throughout life?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more, I think I'm unique in the sense that most guys are probably interested in things, or they're interested in processes, or they're interested in business. Growing up, I've always been far more interested in people. And I think that's generally like a feminine quality. It seems like women are more interested in relationships, and they're more interested in actual people, in people. And that was something that has always been my deepest interest, is my friendships, my family. So being in a relationship, and I went through a divorce. We'll talk about that in a little bit, I'm sure. But I went through divorce. But even in that marriage that didn't work, I was constantly trying to understand why it didn't work, why we weren't connecting, how I could uh, affect a better change in that relationship. And I don't pretend like I was perfect at it all. I certainly have my own faults that I had in that relationship. But um, one of the things that I try to tell guys all the time, and it doesn't come across very well with females if you say this to females, but it makes a lot of sense when you talk to guys about this. You got to treat your relationship like you would treat your business if you were starting a business, which is first and foremost, you have to work at it. So you got to put a lot of time in it. If you want a good relationship, there is a lot of work that goes into that. Just like if you want to have a successful business or successful career, or you want to be successful in fitness or anything else, it just requires an enormous amount of attention. And I think there's this notion, especially with guys, I see this all the time, where it's like, I just got to find that right girl and then I'm good to go. And it's almost like the relationship thing gets put on the back burner. And it's just like, what can I get out of this relationship to help me go do all these other things? Instead of doing the work that is required to have a healthy relationship, which is paying attention to everything that's going on in your relationship, everything that's going on with your wife, what buttons work for her, what buttons don't work for her, what levers to pull, when to pull them, when's the right timing for these things. So it was really interesting for me, having been in two different marriages now, where the first one I couldn't figure out how to make it work, and I didn't have a lot of context when I went into that marriage. Um, the second one, I took the lessons that I'd learned from the first one and really tried to apply them a lot more effectively, and it's been just night and day difference.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so curious because I've also gone through divorce, and for me like that now feels like there's this idea that if a marriage doesn't last forever, that it's a failure. And I reject that fully because there's always something to take away. And just because it doesn't last, till death do you part doesn't mean that that wasn't like exactly how it was meant to be, to bring like both people to like their next phase of life. And so I'm so curious from like your perspective, especially as you said, like you were really paying attention to try to figure out ways to make that your first marriage work. Like, what are some of the lessons that you've taken with you, and also why do you think it didn't work out for you both?
Well, yeah. So when I went through the divorce, I had a lot of like probably most people do. It was something of an identity crisis. I've always been a religious person and a God-fearing person. I felt this sense of like uh complete failure. Like I hadn't achieved the most important mission in my life, which was to hold this relationship together. And we have 3 kids together. So there was that dynamic as well, which is just compounds the pressure to try and make something work. And my whole life, my career, I'm in the business of, we do a lot of different things, but a lot of what I do in my business is motivate guys, train guys, teach mostly men, sometimes women, but mostly men, on how to level up and get better at what they do in the work that we have them doing. And so I've always believed this is like a core tenet of mine, that if you just worked hard enough at something, if you just put in the time, if you just never quit, you'll eventually get there, you'll eventually arrive. And I had that framework in that marriage that I just wasn't going to quit, because it wasn't who I was. That my identity was that you make things work and you figure it out. And going through that divorce, she was the one that instigated the push for the divorce at the end of the relationship. And I was not, I was ready to be that captain that goes down with the ship. I knew our marriage was not good. It wasn't healthy, but you got to stay in there. You got to make it work. You have kids that you're looking out for. And I'm feeling like I've got to just stay and make this thing happen. And, um, when I started going through the divorce, so one of the things that I realized was that, unlike personal goals that you set for yourself, where those types of principles really apply, in a marriage it takes two people. And so you can work as hard as you want at it, but if the other person's not on the same page as you, if they don't have the same commitment to that process of changing and doing the heavy lifting of self-awareness, and of really dialing in on removing the ego from the relationship and really dialing in on the other person's needs and being selfless. And I'm not pretending like I was perfect at that, but if you don't have that other half of the partnership wanting to do that, it doesn't matter how hard you work at it. And this was something that it took a long time to realize and come to terms with, was like, look, it gave me a little bit of grace for myself. Like I can say I tried my very best at it, as imperfect as my efforts were. But at the end of the day, you can't make somebody else do something.
Mm.
And I think we have way too many relationships out there where people are just hanging in there trying to make something work that's never going to work out. But there's way too much pressure. There's too much pressure from family, from friends, from church, from society, that you just stay in it and you make it work. And then there's this stigma that you're divorced and you failed, and all those things, just you can really beat yourself up through that whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. And that pressure alone, I really think forces people, or not forces people, but it creates like a lot, there's a lot more relationships, certainly in like my parents' generation, that have that mentality. You stay together for the kids, and you don't come first. Your needs come, at the bottom, especially below your children's. And like I don't know if this was your experience as well, but for me, I just like I didn't want to be that model for my daughter. I really, really wanted her to see a happy, healthy, thriving mom in a relationship where I felt fulfilled and seen and wanted, so that I really could be, so that I could show her what like love really, really looks like. And we both mutually, her dad and I, made the decision that like this was no longer it for us. And now, since quite a bit of time has passed, like I feel so good about that decision. And I don't carry any of that shame around, that I'm a single mom, but there is still that energy that certainly exists of like, oh, we need to take care of like the single mom, or we like need to feel bad for her. And I really, really have like worked hard to make sure that like that's not my story, that is not something that I'm presenting to my daughter. So I'm so curious, especially you said that you have 3 children, like what was that transition like? I imagine that was something that you were like very intentional with. Like how did you communicate openly with your children as you were going through that? Or like what are some of the things that you like made sure was a priority as you were sort of navigating that change in your life?
Yeah, so the biggest, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. The biggest priority was the children, for sure. And when I went through the divorce, I didn't have that perspective. I really felt like I was failing my kids. So she originally pushed for the divorce. I finally got there with her. We started discussing it. As soon as I agreed to it, she changed course and was like, no, 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 we need to work this out. But at that point, it was like the rubber band had snapped. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to lose my mind. I'd finally got to this point where I could see there was some light at the end of the tunnel. There was some, it felt like for 8.5 years, we were just drowning in this open ocean and there was nowhere to go. Like it was just, every day was miserable. Every day was just, we couldn't figure it out. And finally there was some rock. It didn't look like paradise. It just looked like some rock in the middle of the ocean, post-divorce life, that I could swim to and at least not be fighting to keep my head above the water. But when I went through that for a long time, I felt like I was being selfish. I felt like I was failing my kids, that I wasn't holding it together for them. And so I carried that shame into the kind of the early post divorce part of my life. But what I realized exactly what you're saying, that one, people don't realize this if they haven't gone through divorce. It takes a lot of courage, I think, to actually do that, to actually pull the band-aid off. And I know that sounds ridiculous to some people, and in a world where relationships are cast aside pretty easily, for those of us that take them seriously, especially when we have kids, it's the hardest, most difficult process that you're ever going to go through in your life. But one of the things that I saw fairly early on when we separated was, one, was finally at peace when I would come home. And she was at peace when she was at her house. So the kids were now, they were going to two different houses. I have 50% custody with them, but they were in two different environments that were at peace. And I could see that that was healthier for the kids. Now, I didn't see that at first. Like I said, I was going through it just thinking that I was failing them. But one of the things that we both, I think, did really well in the divorce was we didn't use the kids in the process. We didn't like unload our crap on them. We didn't use them as messengers to deliver any kind of like um, jabs at each other or anything. Like, we both were really careful to make sure the kids knew how much they were loved and how the divorce had nothing to do with them. In fact, we'd stayed married as long as we had for them. And so just showering the kids with a lot of love and making sure that they came first over anything else that was going on in my life was a huge priority. And my kids now are thriving. I mean, they're just kicking ass at school. They're kicking ass in sports. They're well adjusted. I get compliments on them all the time. And I can tell that their happiness, at least I think I can observe this, is that their happiness is greater now than when they were married. But it's so dang important to make sure that the kids are protected and insulated as much as you can when you go through this type of process, which was my priority. But yeah, it's super cool to see, like, these things that we see are just these huge setbacks, massive failures, at least how we identify them. Being able to switch that, which is something that I did. It took me months and months after my divorce to start to change and shift my identity and see, you know what, going through a divorce was actually really, really good for me. As painful as it was, and it was good for my kids and it was good for her. I don't think that's always the case. I think there's lots of times we should work things out, and you should have that more of that stoic mindset to really dig in and do what you can to do the self work to make a relationship work. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's just not there, and you can hang in there as long as you want, but I don't think that's necessarily the best solution.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you so much there. And it can be difficult to see it from that perspective when you're in the thick of the hard and the pain and the grief, to see that, like, I know that you've said this before, and this is something that I like believe fully, is like, I really think that the deepest level of healing from something is getting to a place of having gratitude towards it. So no matter like how difficult it may have been in the moment, once you do reach that place of like, I am so thankful that that happened because it brought me to this place, and I wouldn't have learned all of those lessons along the way without it. And once you can really, really sink into that, then it's like all of that shame energy, all of the guilt, it really does have permission to fall away, and you no longer have to carry that. I do think those are some important emotions though to feel when they are, rising to the surface, but just knowing that like that's not going to last forever. And if you feel like an intuitive sense that and you've put in all of the time and energy and work into trying to figure it out and make things work, and it just isn't there, and again you have that like deep innate like intuitive sense, that is showing up for a reason, because there is a future version of yourself that knows that something else is out there for you. And I know for me, like, I wouldn't be here without all of that. Like, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you right now if I hadn't gone through all of the struggles and challenges within my past relationship. And I certainly wouldn't be like the mom I am to my daughter today. And also, I just like the hat that you're wearing right now is it's so great. And I, as I've shared with you, like, I've done a deep dive with a lot of your videos and a lot of your content, and it just feels so important, not only for, like, I know that majority of your work is with men, but also for women. Like I listen to you speak to these men, and that feels like a very important message for me to hear as well, because men and women speak different languages. And that can be like the biggest challenge in a lot of relationships is there's just a miss because we're looking for one thing and you're looking for something else. And if we're not communicating those things or we don't have the awareness, there can really be like that can lead to more disconnect. Like for me, I just got into the habit of like avoiding it altogether because hard conversations just felt way too scary for me. And so I'm like so curious of to hear some of like your story of like what projected you onto this path? Like what got you to the place where you now feel like this is your passion and your mission to work with men and really help them like understand themselves in a deeper way? Like what brought you to this point?
Well, first, I just want to say I love the way that you just articulated that at the beginning of your statement, where you were talking about leaning into the suffering and learning to appreciate the experiences in life, the emotions in life that we oftentimes look at as being negative.
Mm,
When I went through the depression, I've never had depression or chronic depression my entire life. I've had close family members that have. I've never personally experienced it. I could observe it. When I went through the divorce, I was in a state of depression for probably almost a year,
mm,
just every single day, all day long, just feeling this depression. And it wasn't until I learned to actually start to find value in that depression, value in the pain and suffering, and seeing those things as being formative for me and things that were shaping me and deepening my humanity and deepening my ability to understand others and meet other people where they were at. So leaning into that and finding gratitude, which is not an easy thing to do. I mean, I can't endless hours of praying and meditating and reading and trying to work through this stuff in my head to try and make sense of what was transpiring in my life. It was a lot of hard work, but I got to the point where I really was starting to find gratitude
mm,
in the suffering and not begrudging it anymore. And it's interesting because as soon as I got to that point, it was like the level got unlocked and I was on to the next level. The depression went away, like just almost immediately. But to answer your question, one of the things that was a big problem in our relationship is when I married her, I was transparent about who I was. Um, I presented exactly what I was. I didn't have any skeletons in the closet. There's nothing that I was keeping from her. But I always talked about it as being like a snack. I was Cheez-Its. Like she looked on the shelf and here's this bag of Cheez-Its. All the ingredients was on there. And she picked it up. But as soon as we got married, it was like what I was no longer good anymore. It was like she wanted me to be Doritos or Twizzlers. I'm not attacking her, or criticizing her. It was just the dynamic changed as soon as we got married. Suddenly she wanted me to be different than what I was.
mm,
And I spent the majority of that marriage trying to change who I was because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I thought that's what God wanted me to do. I thought that's what my family wanted me to do. I felt like that was my responsibility, was to make her happy, because my entire life I had been conditioned by all of these different elements around me that when you get married as a man, your job is to make your wife happy.
mm,
Happy wife, happy life sort of thing, which one I just think is some of the worst advice that you can, worst thing that you can say. Uh, because one, the more I tried to change for her, the more frustrated I got not being able to change certain things about myself. But also, it didn't make her happy when I did make changes. It was always a moving target. So it wasn't like this was a good win for her. And I didn't know how to draw boundaries or set the precedents. Like, this is who I am, and I'm not going to bend on this. Like, I'm not mistreating you. I'm not doing anything in this relationship that's irresponsible. I'm just still going to be me. And learning that who I was good. I didn't realize that. So part of the suffering that transpired through that whole process, going through the divorce, was me feeling not only like I was a personal failure, but me feeling like I was having something of a faith crisis, because I turned to God so many times in my marriage that, God, help me change, help me fix this characteristic about me, help me fix this character. I'd built up a lot of bitterness with God through that process. And
mm,
it probably was about a year, maybe a year and a half after my divorce, I was having this conversation with God. I just sometimes will just talk to God wherever I'm at. I'm driving in my car or whatever. And um, I was like, God, why? Yeah, I kind of let down my anger and frustration that I've been holding on to. And God, why didn't you help me become better? Like, ask and you shall receive, knock and shall be open. These are things I believed about you. And I heard a voice in my head. People can say I'm crazy or whatever. This is what came to me, was God said to me, he's like, son, I never wanted you to become what she wanted you to become.
Mm.
I want you to be who you are. That's what I made you to be. And that changed so many, it reoriented me to so many different things in my life. And it helped me see that there really is a lot of toxic messages out there in the world, particularly to men, that we're essentially supposed to be harmless. We're supposed to know our lane, just keep our heads down and do what we're told, and make somebody else happy if you're in a relationship. Nobody ever talked to me about this. My dad, nobody ever sat down and said, son, here are some life lessons. Here's some wisdom that I've gleaned that you should learn. Nobody told me that. And I look around and I start posting some of the stuff up on social media, and so many men are resonating with it. They're coming to me and the same thing. Nobody has ever talked to them like this. They've got all the wrong messaging from society. They've got all the wrong instructions, and they can't figure out why the playbook isn't working. This playbook that's been handed to them. And so that was a lot of the motivation was just, dude, I've got to try and help share some of these insights that I've had with other people so they can learn from it. And they can save themselves from a whole bunch of like pitfalls by actually playing this game of life, whatever this is that we're doing down here, more effectively, understanding what's actually happening and what we're up against, and having some framework that is going to be effective in approaching, particularly the most important relationship that you should ever have in your life, which is with your spouse.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I was getting a little bit emotional as you were sharing that story because I feel so connected to everything you just shared. Like there was a lot of it where I felt like you were telling my story, where I thought I needed to be this like perfect version of myself in my relationship. And every time I would try to achieve that, I would be like let down or disappointed, and because it wasn't met with my partner. And so because of that, I internalized this mindset of like, I'm not enough. And I'm going to keep striving. I'm going to keep trying to like achieve something that's somewhat unattainable. For myself, it was like to be super fit and to be the homemaker and to be sexy and to, cook really good meals and to do all of these things and also to have like a thriving career. And as I was working so hard on all of that and then still feeling like it was a miss, there was still a disconnect in our levels of intimacy. Again, I internalized that as like, oh, I'm not enough. And so that story kept playing out in my mind, and it just led to more disconnect, and especially more disconnect from like myself, from who I really am. And, my confidence dropped. And so now having like the separation from that relationship, realizing that like, no, exactly as you said, like we're taught to sort of like mold ourselves to fit our relationship dynamic. Whereas if we just had better styles of communication and we weren't so afraid to be vulnerable, like again, like I'm not putting all of this on my, daughter's dad. Like I certainly wasn't perfect in it. The biggest lesson was my like lack of communication because had so much fear around being vulnerable. If I had communicated that, like I feel not enough, that would have been received in such a different way than me just pulling away and internalizing it and holding on to it myself, which again led to like more levels of disconnect. But like this stuff really isn't taught. Like a lot of people, I think it's happening more and more. And I think that that's such a big reason why I was drawn to you, is like you're communicating these things to men, and also like these things need to be communicated to women as well, of like, no, who you are is more than enough. And if you're not being received in your relationship, like then that's a different question. You don't need to necessarily always try harder to be seen and wanted and desired in that relationship. Like it's maybe time to have an honest, open, vulnerable conversation of like, is this working for both of us? And if not, then, that's okay. It's not, we don't have to like force something that feels like it's really, really not working. And I think for women, I know that you talk a lot about like feminism, and how like damaging, and I know that this like may be triggering for some people or maybe a little bit controversial, which like personally I love anything that's a little bit controversial, but just how damaging this idea of feminism has become. And yes, maybe it started out with like really good intentions at first, but now it's this idea of like, I have to be a boss babe and I have to, do all of these things to make sure that I'm equal to the man. And I really think that that disconnects us from like our natural softness that women like really, really carry. And so I would love to hear your perspective on like where are we like really going wrong? And like how do we start to like down that path of like hyper feminist, like, and how do we start to really like soften some of that so that women don't feel that need to like keep performing and keep doing it all? Like how do we soften some of that so that we can like connect better with our partners?
Oh yeah, well, if you got the answers to that, I'd love to hear it. I can give you my 2 cents on what I think is going on with feminism. It, right now, we anything that is any message that we're receiving right now that's creating division and divisiveness between us is just it's toxic wherever it's come from or whatever its initial goals were. Anything that is separating us as men and women from one another and creating enmity between us is just it's something that we should all wake up to and immediately dismiss out of our lives because we should be trying to find ways to build each other up and connect. And I think I want to go back to something you just said because I think that was really, really important in relationships. I did the same thing, and I think this happens a lot where, especially in the early parts of your of a relationship, for the sake of keeping the peace, we'll bury things. We won't address it. We won't have those hard conversations because we think it's better or more preferable to just try and be stoic and just let it like be water off your back a little bit. The problem is it's never water off your back. It gets stored somewhere, and this frustration starts to mount, this resentment starts to mount, and now you've got these habitual patterns in your relationship because you weren't willing to confront them early on. Because I think a lot of these problems, if you confront them early on, you can solve them a lot easier than when it's been years of this. And now all the resentment is built up and all the frustration and anger. So one is just communicating with each other really clearly, and being able to call a spade a spade. If something's not working, if there's some behavior that's toxic to the relationship, being able to talk about that in a way that's not accusatory, but is also honest and open about it. When it comes to feminism, the actual movement, I'm not talking about empowering women because I believe in empowering women. Four of my favorite 5 people in the world are women. I love women. Sometimes people think I don't. I hate feminism. I love empowering women. I have 2 daughters. I want my daughters to grow up and just kick ass at life, and I raise them just the same way I raise my sons, ready to go into the world and be prepared. At least that's what I hope that I'm doing with them. But feminism is this weird illogical in my opinion, insanity that is designed specifically to destroy not only masculinity, but also to destroy femininity, getting to the point where you can't even define what a woman is. And ultimately, this is all really, really bad for children. So it's a clear and present danger to the traditional family. And the breakdown of the traditional family, in my opinion, is the greatest danger that we have to society right now. So feminism is the biggest enemy to that I can point out and say this is a clear force in our society that is trying to destroy essentially families. Um, Nature has given us a playbook, and we all have these, men and women. We have different strengths and we have different weaknesses, and when we can come together and recognize those things and say, hey, we can work together and together we're better, like the sum of us together on the same page is, the sum is greater than the parts. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, or 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 plus 1 in a good marriage, it equals infinity. Like the amount of energy and power and radiance that comes out of a relationship like that is just profound. But anything that's trying to destroy that or is trying to essentially rewrite biology is it's just really, really destructive. So I'm not trying to single out women on this because, again, I think women are, in my opinion, the most beautiful creations God has ever made. But this mentality that has gotten infused into a lot of females' minds, I think is just absolutely toxic. And I understand a lot of where it comes from. Men have been assholes over the, for centuries, and there's been a lot of trauma that women have gone through because men have been out of control. And so, on one hand, seeing this equilibrium find itself is very healthy and great. On the other hand, it's gone way too far. So now it's more of a political movement, and a movement that is designed, I think, ultimately to intentionally break down society as is right now and rewrite the entire program. And I think it's just really, really myopic and really, really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you on that fully. And it's the same, like it's this idea of competition that just feels so unnecessary for me. And it's the same thing with like pinning women against each other. Like there's that competitive energy that some women carry, which to me just comes from like a lack or scarcity mindset that like if we all just understood that like we're in this together, and don't we all just want deeper levels of connection and love and like intimacy in all of our relationships, and when you approach life through that lens, it just like for me anyway, all of that like falls away. I don't want to be I'm not here to compete against other women. There's like more than enough in the world to go around, and I certainly don't want to compete against men. Like when you're in a healthy relationship, and that doesn't have to be in a romantic sense, like that can be some of my favorite friendships are with men, because they have a different perspective than I have, and it helps me expand my own awareness, and it helps me understand myself and other people in a much deeper way. And so yeah, I love everything that you said. I fully agree with that, and I think like anything that we can do to get back to more of the, and yeah, maybe it's not working for necessarily everybody, but more of the traditional like family like setting where men naturally like are providers. And not to say that women shouldn't work, like I feel very like I love what I do, but to like not to feel like you have to achieve all of these same things that a man does just so that we can like prove ourselves. I think if you have a passion, absolutely like go for that. But if you innately like want to be a mother and that feels like your truest calling, like there's nothing more beautiful than that, because like we've been doing this for so long, and to really like lift women up to celebrate that a little bit more. I think there is this mindset of like, oh, I'm just a mom. And I really, really like think that that's damaging as well, because being a mom is the hardest job on the planet, as I'm sure like being, you could say being a father is probably like the most important role that you carry, or one of like top three. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on like what are some of the things that like are really, really important to you.
You keep saying so many things that I think are really, really profound and important. And that is first, that I hear this all the time from guys and from women on my pages and comments and DMs, where they will say, I don't need a man or I don't need a woman. And I think that's just absolutely not true. I think we really, really do we need each other. Like it's super important that we come together and figure out how to make this whole thing work together, not as in competition, not as enemies, not trying to outdo each other, but to really figure out how to make this whole life experience as awesome and as beautiful as it can, particularly because we have a sacred responsibility to the next generation, which is what you were asking about, I think, when we cut off. Um, Interesting, too, when you said that the roles of mothers, and I think this has been true in history, that they've largely been just kind of like dismissed as stay-at-home moms, and the work that they do has been definitely demonized in recent years. I don't think there's a more important job on the planet than being a mother. And the only thing second to that, it's even a close second, is being a father. There's not a more fulfilling work that you're ever going to do in your life than raising children. It just blows my mind that people are just throwing that away, this incredible opportunity in life to create another human and to be responsible for them. And all of that comes with it. The unconditional love that you feel and the great deal of responsibility you have for somebody else. You learn to actually love something more than you love yourself. And I don't know how you do that without having children. So there's just so, I mean, you could go on and on about the amount of personal development that comes from having children and raising children. I was just recently down in LA, and do you know who Cuttino Mobley is? Do you watch basketball at all?
No, no.
He's an NBA player. He played a while
Okay.
ago. So
Yeah.
unless you're an avid NBA fan, you wouldn't know. But I was down there talking to him. We were hanging out at his house, and he's a buddy of mine. And I asked him point blank. I said, "What, you know, you were the top of the food chain. You reached the pinnacle of achievement in terms of sports career. You played for 12 years in the league. You were a phenomenal basketball player. Literally hundreds of thousands, millions of people want to do what you did with your life, with your career. Which one, if you could only pick one, being an NBA superstar, being a father, which one would you pick?" And he didn't even hesitate. It was being a father. That was his immediate response. And so when women come along, particularly the feminist movement, and say that women are being mistreated because they're being mothers, and somehow having children is some sort of like lead weight around you, weights on your ankles that are keeping you from realizing your true potential. I just have no idea what they're talking about. It's just so bizarre to me. I'm like, your true potential is raising the next generation. I've started a lot of companies. I've had an enormous amount of success in business. I've got really cool friends. I've traveled the world. I've done amazing things. I'm not saying this in any way to brag, just as a way of being grateful that I've had this awesome life. I've been able to do the things that I've really wanted to do with my life thus far. And all of that combined pales in comparison to the value that I get out of being a father. If I could spend all of my time being a father and still be able to provide for my family, I would pick that any day of the week over having to leave and go out and work. And it's funny again, because this whole notion that your real happiness is going to come from getting a W-2 and working as a cog in the machine for some corporation. That's where you're really going to find yourself and find how awesome you are, is obviously not working for anybody. 85% of men hate their jobs. So women
Mm.
racing into the workforce, like it's already a failed system for most men. Most men hate what they do. They do it because they have to, and they do that because they care about their families, and they're trying to show up and provide, and they're willing to make those sacrifices. So, and I, you see these funny memes on social media where women are like, "Who ever told us we should work? Who started this?" Because they want to stay home. They want to raise kids. Their
Yeah.
natural instincts are kicking in, and they're like, "What am I doing? Like I've been at this job for 5 years, and guess what? Just like all the other guys around me, I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled by it." And that's not to say you can't have a great career. And that's not to say that women shouldn't work. I think a woman should do whatever she wants to do. But I think if you're dismissing the opportunity of raising children, you are missing out on the most incredible part of life. Like the most beautiful, awesome, amazing part of life is finding somebody that you can raise children with and raising those children together, or raising them on your own. If when you go through some of these separations and things like that, there's nothing that's more valuable to me than that. And that is my biggest priority in my life. There's nothing else that even comes close to it. Is making sure that I'm dialed in with my children. I'm spending a lot of time with them. That I'm aware of the journey that they're on, what they're going through, and that first and foremost, they know that whatever happens in their life, their dad loves them, and doesn't just love them from afar, but the dad is in it with them. Like I'm there with them. I'm going to their games. I'm going to their events. I'm sitting in the room talking to them. I'm reading books with them. We're going on vacations together. Those are the things that give me the greatest level of happiness. And when you're a child and you used to think everything was amazing. You look back and you like remember when it was so exciting to go play with your cousins, or to go to the water park, or to go on a vacation. You go camping with your parents because your parents didn't have any money. They're just so excited about it. Everything was new and fresh. And you get older and life kicks your ass a little bit, and you start to get jaded and worn out, and nothing seems that fresh and exciting anymore. But then you have these kids and you start living the life through them, and you see all the new things that they're going through, and it brings back that nostalgia. It brings back that excitement for life. It rejuvenates you. So I guess your question was, how do you raise kids? Is that what you're asking me, or help me
Yeah, I
remember
actually
exactly?
have no idea. I love where you where you took all of that, because it's just like it is definitely the biggest initiation like life could ever present to you. And if you haven't looked at your own stuff by the time you have kids, like guess what? All of that stuff is coming up, and it is the most amazing opportunity to like change some of the like cycles and patterns that you've been carrying for a really long time and lay some of that to rest. It is like I mean, there's nothing more triggering than like your own child sometimes, but it really is because they are the biggest mirrors into ourself of like, oh, that's something that really didn't even know was in existence for me. Like, thank you for bringing this to my awareness because I don't want to pass that on to you. And maybe not everybody feels that way as a parent, but that certainly has been my experience of like, how can I actually sit with this uncomfortable part of myself to assure that like I'm not handing this down to you, because otherwise, like if we're just unconsciously moving through life, yeah, like the generational cycles, the generational trauma that we hand to our children, like that it's not going to go anywhere if we don't actually take the time to look within and confront some of those like parts within us. And I just loved everything that you said because I have such a beautiful relationship with my own dad, and he was very present. He was a very active father. He was my soccer coach. He came to all of my games. Like he showed up. He came on field trips when I was younger. And I really believe that the like person that I am today, the level of like independence and confidence that I just carry naturally, a big part of that comes from the relationship that I had with my dad. And I see it with my daughter and her dad. They have this beautiful relationship. And so the like, yes, being a mother, I agree with you. I really think is like the most important thing us as women will ever do, and also the relationship that a child has with their father. I'm only witnessing it with my daughter, but I would believe that it's very similar with a son, just in a different context, that relationship dynamic that a child has with their father is so important. So to hear you just so passionately talk about how much you love being there for your children, it's really, really beautiful to hear you say that, especially coming from a man that, like talks with a lot of other men. And, I've watched some of your videos where it looks like you're having like a fireside chat with these
Yeah.
men. And I think that that's, so powerful in itself. And I would love to hear like, what are some of the things, because I've been having more conversations with men that really talk about that like men are struggling and men are hurting. And I'm sure you probably can attest to that with like the work that you do. What are some of the things that men are battling internally? Because I think as women, like we don't realize that this is going on in the background because men have been taught from so many avenues, like bottle it up, man up, be tough, don't cry, don't show your emotions. Like, and I think it's important for women to just have awareness of like what's going on internally for a lot of men out there. Like what would you say, or what would you like want women to know as far as like some of the things that men are really like battling with internally right now?
Um, yeah, there's a lot to that. I'm glad you asked that question because this is like really near and dear to my heart because I deal with men. I've been dealing with men, particularly young men, college age kids, most of my adult, my career. And so I see a lot of this stuff and I see how so many guys are really suffering. And I think a lot of it starts with what we've already been talking about in regards to feminism and this rise of like this attack on masculinity. So you have the very identity of who a man is being attacked, and they're being conditioned at an early age that the qualities that make them a man are bad. And so they're constantly in this disconnect from who they are. Like these things about me are bad. These being aggressive is bad. Being strong is bad. Fighting is bad. Like being competitive is bad. These are actually, when harnessed, very powerful, important characteristics that make a man and should give a woman, when she's with a good man, a sense of security. But that's under attack. And so these kids, these boys are being raised at an early age, a lot of times by just a single mom. They get, or the dad's absent. And so the mom's doing most of the raising. They go to school. It's almost always a female teacher. And they're conditioned from this early age to sit at a desk, shut up, do what they're told from a female, and essentially be a yes man to the female feminine energy. And then you have this, not only this attack on masculinity, but this rise of this notion that men are no longer needed. One of the most important things for the male ego, and we always talk about ego being bad. I think to me, ego is like a horse, a wild stallion that when it's bridled and harnessed and trained, it's actually very, very effective. And you should have an ego as a man if it's controlled. When it's not controlled, it's destructive. But for a man to be told that he is not needed is a huge attack on his ego. So we're growing up in a society where we're told everything about us is bad. And then we're told that as men, we're no longer needed, that women don't need us. And one of the things I see is this huge disconnect right now on the feminine side of things is all these women are showing up now. I'm a bad bitch. I can say whatever I want, do whatever I want to do. I don't need a man. Now, why don't I have a man? Where's the man? And you're like, because you've just told every guy out there by your body language, by just the way you showed up, that he's not needed in your life. So you're not going to attract a masculine man. You're going to attract one of these yes men that have been conditioned to just be yes to you, a beta, what we call a beta male or whatever, for lack of a better term. And you're going to find them not attractive or appealing at all. But that's because you've been so off-putting in your energy and in your persona that I don't need any man in my life. I can do everything that I need to do on my own. That a guy that is a masculine man who wants to be a provider, who wants to take care of his woman, who wants to take care of his children, you're saying I don't need that. I mean, that's a fundamental problem. Like, and you're not going to find a masculine man ever that's going to take you seriously. And so women are their own worst enemies in this right now. And I don't blame women. I think it's the same thing with boys. While boys have been conditioned to be weak and see themselves as bad, women have been fed at an early age this toxic bullshit that they don't even understand why their playbook isn't working either. So we both have these different playbooks that have been handed to us, I think, by nefarious influences, like intentionally. I think this is more contrived and manipulated than just some organic expression of, you know, the evolution of the human species or something like that. Like we're seeing the destruction of families, the destruction of our roles as men and women, and it's benefiting a certain group of people in society right now that are interested in this. So women, I think we just have to understand we really do need each other. And if you want to have a relationship with a good man, you have to make space in your life as a woman to show him that he's needed, that you need that masculine energy in your life. You need a man that's going to come in and that's not saying you're weak. That's just saying that we need each other, that we need to come together and bridge this bullshit that's been going on for far too long, and recognize that we both need each other. I need, you know, I got, now that I'm remarried, um, it's just such a difference between my first marriage and my second marriage. My life has just taken off. And so much of the credit for my life, just I would be talking to you either if I hadn't gone through a divorce, nor do I think I'd be talking to you right now if I hadn't got remarried to the girl that I'm married to now. She's a badass. Like, she kicked ass in business. She kicked ass in, she came to our marriage with hundreds of thousands of dollars on her own. What woman does that? Like, she'd gone out into business and just killed it. None of that was particularly all that attractive to me long term, but short term, I was like, man, this girl's a badass. She's so cool. But it was that she needed me and she wanted to have a family and she wanted to, you know, these traditional values. That really is what attracted me to her. And now she's just like this nuclear reactor of energy in my life. Like, everything about me is better because I have her in my corner and she has my back. And she's not subservient to me. I don't dominate her. In fact, the opposite. I go out of my way to make sure whatever I'm doing in my life, she gets deference to everything else. But I also have to do it in a way that I'm not laying down my masculinity to be a harmless doormat. Because I think as soon as I started doing that with her, especially as powerful as she is, she would lose respect for me. She would lose attraction for me. She would no longer want to have sex with me, because women only want to have sex with a man they respect. They're only going to respect a man who has some boundaries, that has some sort of like rock she can build on. Like, she knows I come up against this, okay, that's not okay. And she understands that. She can trust that that man is a solid rock, you know, that she can, if she needs to throw her emotions against, or she can, you know, pain that she's going through, she can come to, and there's going to be something solid there. So it's a balancing act that's really hard to do with all of these mixed messages coming from society right now. But that's what I would say to women is make space for men. Make sure men know that they're needed in your life. And if you're in a relationship, like, I talk a lot about gassing women up and making them feel emotionally secure and safe. Women need to do the same thing for their men. Men need to feel respected and they need to feel needed. And if you're in a relationship where you're doing neither one of those things, you're going to have a really shitty marriage or a really shitty relationship, in my opinion.
Yeah. Wow. There was so much greatness in everything that you just said. I agree with you fully. And it's nobody's fault that this is the place that we've come to. Like, yes, I agree with you. I think that there is some like darkness with, like, you know, wanting this disconnect in our family, you know, nucleus and in our relationships. I do agree in that sense. But like, us being like the men and women that are, you know, on the receiving end of all of this. Like, it's nobody's fault that we're here. It is just now our responsibility to have these types of conversations, to raise awareness. Like, for me, I I had that idea in my mind of like, oh, I don't need to feed his ego. And that is such a false story. Like, I created that in my mind of like me being too affectionate or me giving too many compliments or affirmations would be damaging, when it is so the opposite. By me like withholding that, all that's creating is more disconnect in a relationship, when the thing I'm craving the most is connection, is deeper levels of intimacy. So if both players can drop the walls a little bit and soften into it, and like, it is not a sign of weakness to express like more love and to be like more affectionate. That is actually a sign of strength, because you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And the more vulnerable we are, yeah, like there is potential there to get hurt, but also the biggest like win from that is having a thriving, healthy relationship, which ultimately is like what we are all craving. And yeah, showing like, I mean, for women, like, that's to be seen and wanted and desired is such a deep, like, for me, that is like my deepest need as a woman from my partner. And as you said, like, men need to feel needed as well. And when we're both able to come to the table from that approach, like, yeah, as you said, like, one plus one equals infinity. Like, the possibilities are really are endless, because we're lifting each other up, and through the lifting each other up, we're lifting everybody else up around us. Like, not only our children, but we're inspiring other people to show up that way and to love on their partner, and to really like break free from a lot of those cages that we've found ourselves in, where that idea of I don't need a man, which really is so toxic and is such a like, if anything, like, to fully like reject that notion as a woman, whether you're single or in a relationship, like, as you said, we absolutely need each other. So yeah, I love what you're doing, and I'm super grateful that you are like putting in all of the energy into what you're sharing with the world. It feels extremely important, not only for men, but for women, and for our children too. So as kind of like a last question, because it seems like from the outside you are in like a very happy, fulfilling relationship dynamic. And that's super inspiring, especially like, you know, I'm single at this point, but I know that like that is coming for me, because I've done the inner work on myself to get to this place. And I watched a video where you shared that you, I think shortly after you got married, you purchased a journal, and every day for the first year you
Oh
wrote
yeah.
something in this journal of like one thing that you loved about your wife. And like, again, those things don't really cost much, but like the like cost of doing that is your wife feeling so seen, so appreciated. And that like trickles down to how she mothers, that trickles down to how she shows up in your relationship, how she shows up with her friendships. Like, the impact of something that may be looked at as like a small thing is huge. And so I would love to hear from you, like, what is one thing that you've found has like been really, really helpful in your relationship to really like keep both of you feeling fulfilled and happy at the end of the day?
Well, man, I first of all, dear, I think the world needs a lot more women like you for sure. So I commend you on the work that you're doing. And there needs to be more of these voices on both sides of the spectrum, you know, that are speaking up and sharing things that are actually honest and truthful and helpful and positive. Man, in this world, we just need to pass on more positivity. And just like you were talking about in parenting, how we can pass on our demons to our children, we also pass on the good qualities of us. We're doing that right now as a generation. What are we going to pass on to the next generation? And it's, I think what's really encouraging to me is there are more and more people waking up to this. And
Mm.
fortunately, I feel like I can be a part of that in a small way to try and help make the world a better place. And sometimes you have to talk about things that are bad, and you got to say that they're bad, and you got to be honest about it. So sometimes it may come across as negative, but everything, hopefully, at least what I'm doing, and I know what you're doing, is to try and elevate and make things better in the world. What you said earlier is so profoundly important. So my first marriage, and I'm not trying to demonize her at all, but also just to be able to describe things as they were. There was a notion in that relationship where she was, in fact, like my biggest critic. Like it was like almost like a moral obligation that she needed to make sure that she, like you said, she didn't feed my ego. So whatever I did that was good or noteworthy, it would always be met with some sort of well, okay, because of this. Well, there's some sort of like low key criticism in that. And I actually thought that was kind of normal and just to be expected. I didn't resent it or begrudge it. I'm only saying that now because I can see the contrast. To answer your question, what can you do to really make a relationship vibrant? You need to be each other's biggest cheerleader. Like that's just like 101. And you need to be first, like you said, you have to be healthy yourself. Like if you're not a healthy person, you shouldn't get into a relationship. And too many unhealthy people are looking for a relationship to solve the problems in their life. And they're usually meeting somebody else who's unhealthy as well. And if you have two unhealthy people coming into a relationship, what are you going to get? You're going to get an unhealthy relationship. But if you can have two people that have done a lot of the work, a lot of waking up to this stuff and dismissing of all the bullshit that's going on, that are coming to this relationship self-aware and not needing anything, you're happy and healthy with who you are, because ultimately the most important relationship you're ever going to have in this life is a relationship that you have with yourself. So first and foremost, like getting your own house in order, especially before you're throwing around criticism or you feel like it's your job to diminish somebody else or make them feel like they're less than perfect. First, get your own shit in order. Do the heavy soul work that's required to get your house in order. And now, if you have two healthy people that don't need each other, but they just want each other and they like each other, you're like, I actually like the bag of Cheez-Its. It's novel. Like my wife actually likes Cheez-Its, and it seems like such a novel thing, but it's also seems like super, super simple. She actually likes what she picked up off the shelf. And she is my biggest cheerleader. Like she just gasses me up all of the time, which creates this enormous amount of connection. And the things that I do in return for her are the exact same. I do everything I can to make sure that she knows how valuable she is to me, how important she is to me, how beautiful she is. I notice the things that she does to improve our home. She wants to be a stay-at-home mom, and she wants to be raising kids. That's her dream. So I do everything I can to make sure I gas that up. Like I am her biggest fan. And the interesting thing is when you're in that frame of mind, these things that you do that you may attach a cost to, like in the case of what you brought up with the journal, where there was not so much a monetary cost, it cost $7 at the gift shop, but there was a lot of time put into that. I did that solely because I loved her. It was just because I really adore her and I wanted to do something that was going to mean something to her. That's the reason why I did it. However, the return on that investment of time has been 100-fold back to me, right? Like it's like I've been paid back way more than any amount of effort that I put into doing that. So if you can just realize you're on the same team and your job in a relationship is to be each other's biggest fan. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that you don't have boundaries. That doesn't mean you don't have hard conversations, because we're all, no matter how much soul work we've done, no matter how much of that heavy lifting, internal heavy lifting we've done, we're all deeply flawed at the end of the day. But finding that those flaws are actually beautiful. Like you don't need somebody perfect. You love them in not in spite of their flaws. You love them with their flaws. You love the things that make them who they are. And so if you can get in that frame of mind where you just really value and enjoy the person that you're with, and that you're there to be their 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 biggest fan, you get something that's just amazing. And I pinch myself every day right now. I'm like, this is just too good to be true. When's the curtain going to drop? Like when is this all going to fall apart? Because life isn't supposed to be this good. Um, but it's not really that complicated. It's hard to do. In all the things that we've been discussing, all of these messaging, this bad messaging that we get from society around us, it's actually not that complicated. Get yourself healthy, work on yourself, find somebody that you actually like, love them with everything that whatever they have, whatever they brought to the table, learn to love that. As long as there's not some grievous like neglect or abuse or something like that, like learn to just appreciate that person and see them and recognize them and make sure that they know that you're in their corner first and foremost. And I think you're going to get the same thing back from that person, tenfold, a hundredfold.
Oh, I am so grateful for you. That that is so inspiring and important, I think, for everyone to hear because as you said, like it's not that complicated. Like we just need like the complicated piece really is like unlearning a lot of the things that we've been taught or that we've picked up along the way and recognizing like okay what is it that I really want, and ultimately we all want a healthy, happy, thriving, fulfilled relationship. And in order to get that, yeah, to be each other's like number one fan, biggest supporter, that's really not that hard. It's really not that complicated. So it's just so nice to hear you say all of that. You're a beautiful, beautiful human. And it sounds like your wife is as well. And you're, teaching and guiding three like young humans to be like the best version of themselves. And so I'm so deeply like magnetized to people like you because you're doing the work. You're choosing like the road less traveled because sometimes it's not the easy path always. And sometimes like, yeah, we may have like they may be somewhat controversial opinions, but I hope one day like this is like the norm. I really hope that like more people really start to have conversations like this because yeah, I'm an optimist at the end of the day, and I really see a much more beautiful world for our children than like the one that we have created today. Well, of course, there's so much beauty out in the world. I think like we're all, when we choose this path, I think like the ripple effect that it creates is definitely a world that like I want to be a part of. So I'm super, all that to be said, I'm just super grateful for you and everything that you're sharing and for having this conversation with me. Like this stuff lights me up and keeps me going. And so I would love to hear from you, like where can people find and connect with you? Like can people purchase the hat you're wearing? Share
Yeah.
with us like some of the ways that people can find you and continue to like learn from the life that you're living.
So first, Diera, I just want to say you are part of the solution, and
Mm.
it's like super encouraging to me, despite all the negative forces out there. How many people, men and women, are starting to wake up to this and are really trying to do the work to turn the ship around. On my social media, you can find me at Adam Allred Official. I'm talking to men from a masculine point of view. It's interesting to me and encouraging to me how many women have started following me, and surprising. Honestly, I'm surprised that anybody follows me. So anybody's welcome to go look at my content. It's just basically the musings of a madman. I'm still surprised that anybody listens to me. I'm just kind of throwing out my thoughts, and somehow that's resonating with a lot of other people, which is also encouraging. But yeah, you keep the hats in the link. Don't buy it on Amazon. They're selling. We got we sent a cease and desist letter to people on Amazon selling the hat, and they're selling cheap Chinese versions of it. So the hat,
Of
if you want to get the
course.
Make Men Great Again hat, it's in the link on my bio. It's in my bio on my Instagram page, Adam Allred Official. And I hope for us to do more of this. This is good.
Mm.
This is the type of work. These are the type of conversations that we need to have. We've got to be more positive and optimistic about each other, about life, about what's really going on down here. Some of that's going to come with some hard conversations about what isn't working and what we need to dismiss and what's bad. But life is beautiful, and at the end of the day, we get to create whatever we want in this life. We get to create happiness or we get to create misery. And
Mm.
I commend you for being on the side of happiness, on the side of positivity. So thanks for having me on your show.
Mm. Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Adam. This was super fun. And absolutely, there will be more of this.